on the first Sunday of November 1818, Sabina Kenward learned that there were cruelties more efficient than shouting. The private chapel at Lindenwick Park had barely emptied when Lucasta stopped her behind the eastern wall and said with perfect calm, "No one comes to hear you, Sabina. They hear what becomes presentable once your name is removed." The words struck more deeply because Lucasta did not sound angry. She sounded certain. Morning service had ended only minutes before. Carriages waited beyond the gravel sweep. Voices drifted from the direction of the house, softened by clipped yews and old stone. Somewhere ahead, county ladies were discussing luncheon, charity subscriptions, and the forthcoming musical program, as though the world contained no sharper danger than an unsuitable hymn selection. Sabina stood with a folded packet of copied music held against her gown and felt her uncle's gaze settle on her like a judgment already decided. Sir Eustace Kenward had followed Lucasta around the chapel path after discovering that Sabina had asked one quiet question before service. Why, she had wanted to know, was Lucasta to receive public praise for an arrangement Sabina had largely created? She had not accused. She had not raised her voice. She had simply asked why her own name had to disappear before her work became acceptable. Sir Eustace looked at her now with the controlled irritation of a man inconvenienced by truth. "You have been given a place in my household," he said. "You are fed, dressed appropriately, and included where your circumstances might otherwise prevent inclusion. It is astonishing that you still find reasons to complain." Sabina tightened her hold on the music. "I asked for my work to be named accurately." Lucasta gave a soft laugh. "There, that is exactly what I mean. Your work, your name, your recognition. You make everything so unpleasantly personal. It is personal when the work is mine, is it?" Lucasta tilted her head. She was 24 and beautiful in the effortless way that made rooms forgive her before she had asked forgiveness. "You copy beautifully. You make corrections. You fuss over passages no one else notices. Then I make them fit for performance." Sabina looked directly at her. "You mean you perform them?" For the first time, Lucasta's smile thinned. Sir Eustace stepped forward. "Enough." Sabina heard the command she had obeyed in 100 forms. Enough questions. Enough truth. Enough dignity that required other people to surrender convenience. She should have lowered her eyes. She had done so before. Instead, she said, "If it is harmless for Lucasta to receive praise for the arrangement, then it should be harmless for my name to be attached to it." Eustace's face hardened. "You should be grateful to be useful." The chapel bell rope shifted faintly inside the building as the last servant closed a door. Sabina heard the small wooden knock through the stone. Then her uncle said, "No one wants you." Nothing in his voice rose. That made the sentence worse. It was not an insult thrown in anger. It was delivered as fact. Lucasta looked away first, though not from shame. Perhaps even she understood that the words had gone farther than intended. Sabina felt something inside her become frighteningly still. She had heard gentler versions for years. "You must be reasonable. You must understand your position. You are fortunate to have a home. Lucasta has better prospects. It is only music. Do not make trouble." "But no one wants you," was the sentence hidden beneath all the others. Eustace adjusted one glove. "Compose yourself before you return to the house." Then he turned away. Lucasta lingered half a second longer. Her gaze dropped to the packet in Sabina's arms. "Do bring those copies inside. I shall need them tomorrow." Sabina did not answer. Lucasta's mouth curved. "There is no need to be dramatic." She followed her father toward the house. Sabina remained where she was until their footsteps faded. Only then did her fingers begin to shake. The packet of music slipped against her sleeve. She caught it before it fell. That tiny act of control nearly undid her. She moved around the rear of the chapel, beyond the line of yews where no departing guest should see her, and pressed one palm against the cold stone. The November air smelled of damp earth, clipped greenery, and the faint smoke of distant chimneys. Sabina drew one breath, then another. Neither went deep enough. She set the copied music on the low stone ledge beside her and reached beneath the edge of her cloak. Her fingers closed around the small silver cross hanging from a narrow black ribbon at her throat. It had belonged to her mother. The metal was cold at first, then warmed inside Sabina's hand. She did not collapse. She did not sink to the ground. She did not cry loudly enough for anyone to come searching. Tears simply escaped because there was nowhere else for them to go. And for several moments, she could not force her breathing into order. "No one wants you." She shut her eyes. That was the cruelty of such words. They gathered old evidence around themselves. Every invitation accepted without enthusiasm. Every family decision made without consulting her. Every piece of music praised more warmly once Lucasta performed it. Every time Sabina had been thanked for helping and forgotten before the applause. She heard a movement beyond the yew-lined corner. Her eyes opened. A man stepped into view. Quentin Rothbury, Duke of Ardenshaw, stopped several paces away. Sabina's breath caught for an entirely different reason. He wore no expression of embarrassed sympathy, no exaggerated concern, no pretended ignorance. He was 38, broad-shouldered, formally dressed for Sunday, and so controlled in manner that lesser men often mistook stillness for coldness. Sabina knew at once that he had not merely arrived, he had heard. The realization burned hotter than the tears. She straightened, though one hand still enclosed the silver cross. Quentin did not approach. "Miss Kenward." Sabina wiped one cheek with the side of her glove and wished fiercely that he had chosen to lie. He did not. "Your Grace." The title came out steadier than she felt. Silence passed between them. Sabina expected the usual phrases. "You must not upset yourself." Families say things in anger. I am sure they did not mean it. Quentin said none of them. Instead, he asked, "I heard every word. Do you wish me to pretend I did not?" Sabina stared at him. The question was almost unbearable, because it gave her a choice. At the precise moment, everyone else had denied her one. She looked toward the path where Eustace and Lucasta had disappeared, then back at Quentin. "No." Her voice was quiet. "I have had enough pretending done around me." Something changed in his face. Not pity, attention. Very well. He did not ask why she had been crying. He already knew. He did not ask whether she was truly unwanted. He seemed to understand the insult itself was not the entire wound. Sabina released the cross, but kept her fingers near it. "How long were you there?" "Long enough." "That is not an answer." "From the moment Miss Kenward said no one came to hear you." Shame flashed through her before anger overtook it. "Then you heard too much." "Perhaps." "You do not sound sorry." "I am sorry it was said." His gaze held hers. "Not that I heard it." Sabina looked away first. Beyond the yews, a lady laughed near the main path. The normality of the sound felt almost offensive. Quentin glanced toward the folded packet of music on the stone ledge. "Are those the copies she told you to carry?" Sabina followed his gaze. "Yes." "Did you prepare them?" "Some of them." "And the arrangement they intend to perform?" She was silent. Quentin waited. He had the patience of a man who did not fear silence and the rank of a man accustomed to answers. Yet he did not press. At last Sabina said, "That depends upon whose name is attached to it." Quentin's eyes sharpened. Not enough to expose emotion. Enough for her to know the answer mattered. Voices approached from the farther path. The Dowager Duchess appeared at a distance, with two ladies, all three visible beyond the trees. Quentin stepped slightly aside, preserving the propriety Sabina had not possessed the calm to consider. "You should return to the house before anyone wonders where you are." Sabina almost laughed. Do people wonder? The moment the words escaped, she regretted them. Quentin did not answer with false reassurance. He looked at the packet of music, then at her. "I do." The simplicity of it left her without defense. He offered no arm. He did not touch her. He merely waited until she picked up the copied pages herself. Then they walked back toward the main path, with several feet between them and the Dowager Duchess plainly visible ahead. Sabina's eyes were dry by the time the house came into view. Her breathing had steadied. Nothing had been solved. Eustace was still her uncle. Lucasta would still expect the music tomorrow. Society would still praise what it was told to praise. Yet one fact had changed. Someone powerful had heard the truth before it could be polished into harmlessness. At the edge of the gravel path, Quentin stopped. His gaze fell once more to the folded music in Sabina's hands. Whose hand arranged what they intend to perform? Sabina looked at him. For the first time that morning, she did not lower her eyes. "Mine," she said. The following morning, Kenward House seemed determined to pretend that nothing had changed. Breakfast appeared at the usual hour. The fire burned evenly behind the brass fender. Sir Eustace unfolded his newspaper with the solemnity of a man who believed order could be restored simply by behaving as though disorder had never existed. Lucasta sat near the window in pale morning silk, sorting music beside an open black leather case. Sabina entered quietly and stopped before she reached the table. Inside the case, beneath several clean rehearsal sheets, lay a blue-bound folio with a split silver clasp. Her folio, the sight struck harder than she expected. She had spent years filling those pages with first attempts, corrections, failed transitions, and arrangements begun when grief had made ordinary speech impossible. Some pages carried dates. Others bore crossings out so heavy that the ink had nearly worn through the paper. Lucasta had borrowed it for one rehearsal weeks ago. She had never returned it. Sabina looked at the blue cover and said, "That is mine." Lucasta did not turn immediately. She adjusted one loose sheet, placed it carefully inside the case, and only then looked over her shoulder. "Good morning to you too. The folio." Sabina kept her voice calm. "I lent it to you for one rehearsal." Lucasta gave a small smile. "And I still need it." "That was not the agreement." Sir Eustace lowered the upper edge of his newspaper. "What agreement?" Sabina looked at him. "I lent Lucasta my blue folio. She was to return it after one rehearsal." Eustace sighed. "Must every small domestic matter become a grievance now? It is not a grievance. It is mine." Lucasta rested one hand on the open case. "You are becoming very possessive." Ownership often sounds like possessiveness to the person refusing to return something. The words came more easily than they would have the day before. Lucasta's smile disappeared. Sir Eustace folded the newspaper slowly. "That tone is unnecessary. So is keeping what does not belong to you. The folio contains music produced under this roof. It contains music written by me, for the benefit of this family." Sabina's hand tightened at her side. "That doesn't make it yours." Silence followed. Sir Eustace stared at her as though the room had shifted beneath him. Yesterday, behind the chapel, he had told her no one wanted her. He had expected the sentence to force her back into obedience. Instead, something had changed. Sabina did not feel fearless. She felt the same dependence, the same uncertainty, the same knowledge that Kenward House was not hers, but fear no longer seemed like proof that Eustace was right. Lucasta closed the case. The blue folio disappeared from view. "You are being absurd. It is only a family music book. Then return it." "I said I still need it." "For what?" Lucasta's eyes sharpened. "The musicale. You have your clean copies, and I may require the earlier pages." "Why?" The question landed more precisely than Sabina intended. Lucasta hesitated, only for a second. It was enough. So did Eustace. "Because arrangements change," Lucasta said. "Then explain which change you need." Lucasta's face cooled. "I don't have to justify myself to you." "No, but you do have to return what is mine." Before Lucasta could answer, the butler appeared at the threshold. Her Grace, the Dowager Duchess of Ardenshaw, His Grace, the Duke of Ardenshaw. Sir Eustace rose so quickly that his coffee spoon struck the saucer. Lucasta's posture altered at once. Her expression softened. Her hand moved away from the music case. Sabina remained standing beside the breakfast table. The Dowager Duchess entered first, composed in dark plum silk beneath a travelling mantle, followed by Quentin Rothbury. Formal greetings were exchanged. Tea was offered. The Dowager accepted. Quentin did not sit immediately. His gaze moved once across the room. It paused on Sabina, then on the black leather music case, then returned to her face. Sabina knew he remembered the folded copies from the day before. More dangerously, she knew he remembered her answer. "Mine." Sir Eustace began speaking about the weather and the charitable musicale with such effort that every word sounded polished. The Dowager Duchess responded courteously. Lucasta joined in with easy charm. Quentin remained quiet until a pause opened naturally. Then he said, "I hope we have not interrupted preparations." Lucasta smiled. "Only music, Your Grace. Nothing important." Quentin's eyes rested on the closed case. "Music appears to have caused a great deal of importance lately." Lucasta's fingers stiffened. Sir Eustace laughed without humor, a small family disagreement. Nothing more. Quentin looked at Sabina. "Miss Kenward?" The simple act of asking her directly changed the room. Sir Eustace's mouth tightened. Sabina could have rescued everyone from discomfort. She could have called the dispute trivial. She could have said there was nothing to discuss. Instead, she said, "My blue folio is inside that case." Quentin's gaze moved to it. "Does it belong to you?" "Yes." "Entirely?" "Yes." Lucasta gave a light laugh. "Sabina makes it sound very dramatic. It is merely a collection of family music." Quentin turned to her, then returning, "It should be harmless." The Dowager Duchess lifted her teacup, but said nothing. Lucasta's colour shifted faintly. Sir Eustace intervened. "Your Grace, with respect, this is a private matter." "I had gathered that. Then you will understand why it need not concern anyone beyond this family." Quentin looked back at Sabina. "Does Miss Kenward agree?" The question was almost identical to the choice he had given her behind the chapel. Not whether she wished to be rescued, whether she wished the truth concealed. Sabina looked at the black case. No one word. Sir Eustace's jaw tightened. Quentin inclined his head once. "Then the matter appears unsettled." Lucasta sat straighter. "Sabina has always been sensitive about her little arrangements." Sabina turned toward her. "They are little only when I claim them." Lucasta's eyes flashed. Sabina continued, "They become impressive once you do." The room went completely still. The Dowager Duchess lowered her cup. Sir Eustace said, "That will do," Quentin answered before Sabina could retreat. "No." His voice remained calm. "I don't believe it will." Eustace stared at him. Quentin continued. "Miss Kenward has stated that the folio belongs to her. No one has denied that she wrote the contents. The only argument offered is that the work was done beneath this roof." "And that matters," Eustace said. "So does authorship." The word entered the room like a door opening. Lucasta rose and moved closer to the music case. "You make it sound as though I have stolen something." Quentin looked at her. "Have you? Of course not. Then return it." Lucasta looked toward her father. Eustace stepped forward. "The folio remains where it is until after the musicale. Lucasta needs it." Sabina felt the old pattern closing around her again. Need becoming entitlement. Family becoming ownership. Her silence becoming agreement. Quentin did not answer for her. He waited. Sabina understood the significance of that restraint. "I need it too," she said. Lucasta laughed softly. "For what?" Sabina looked at the closed case. "To remember what is mine before everyone else decides for me." No one spoke. The Dowager Duchess set down her cup. "A reasonable need, I should think." Sir Eustace had no safe answer to that. Lucasta's fingers rested on the lid of the case. Her expression regained its polished calm, but something colder moved beneath it. "By the end of the month," she said, "everyone will know whose music this is." Sabina heard the threat. So did Quentin. He did not challenge Lucasta again. He did not seize the case. He did not command a transfer. That restraint unsettled Sabina almost as much as action would have done, because it forced the next truth into the open. Lucasta still had the folio. Eustace still defended her. The coming musicale would place Sabina's work before the county under another woman's name. Yet one thing had changed since yesterday. Sabina had said mine aloud twice, once behind a chapel and once inside the room where her uncle expected obedience. No one had struck the word from the air. As conversation shifted toward the charitable subscriptions, Quentin finally sat beside his mother. His gaze returned once to the black leather music case. Sabina saw the exact moment he understood that the question was no longer whether she had arranged the music. The question was what, inside that blue-bound folio, might prove how much of herself had been taken. 2 days later, Lindenwick Park received its afternoon callers beneath a pale November sky that had turned the long western windows to muted gold. Sabina arrived with Sir Eustace and Lucasta shortly after 3 o'clock, having spent the 5-mile carriage journey in a silence made deliberate by all three of them. Lucasta had spoken only once, to remark that the Duchess's drawing room would be crowded, and that Sabina ought not to mistake courtesy for particular interest. Sabina had looked out at the hedgerows and said nothing. Silence, she was beginning to understand, could mean many things. Submission was only one of them. The blue folio remained in Lucasta's possession at Kenward House, locked inside the black leather music case. Sabina had not forgotten it. She had merely stopped believing that repeating the same request in private would make refusal more honest. The drawing room at Lindenwick was warm with firelight and subdued conversation, its tall mirrors catching fragments of silk, dark coats, silver tea service, and the slow choreography of county society at ease with itself. The Dowager Duchess received her guests near the hearth. Quentin stood some distance away, beside an elderly gentleman discussing subscriptions for the charitable musicale. He did not cross the room when Sabina entered. He only looked at her. It was not a prolonged stare. Not intimacy. Recognition. Sabina disliked how much the distinction mattered. Lucasta, meanwhile, moved naturally toward the center of attention. Within minutes, she was speaking with two young ladies and Mrs. Ellison, a widow known throughout the county for remembering every musical performance worth remembering, and several that were not. The conversation turned to the coming musicale. Mrs. Ellison smiled. "I am told you're preparing something unusual, Miss Kenward. The old chapel hymn, is it not?" Lucasta inclined her head with practiced modesty. "Something very simple." Sabina, seated several chairs away, felt her fingers tighten around the edge of her reticule. Mrs. Ellison continued. Lady Marden mentioned a particularly thoughtful transition in the middle movement. She said it changed the character of the entire hymn. Sabina went still. She knew that transition. She had created it during her mother's final winter, when grief had made every room in Kenward House seem too quiet, and music had become the one place where sorrow could move without explanation. The first version had resolved too soon. The second had grown heavy beneath its own sadness. The third had allowed the upper voice to rise alone before the harmony gathered beneath it. Her mother had heard that version once from the schoolroom pianoforte, and whispered that the music sounded as though grief had remembered how to stand. Lucasta had not been there. She had not heard the first attempt fail. She had not seen Sabina cross out half a page and begin again. Yet now she accepted Mrs. Ellison's praise with a soft smile. It came gradually. Sabina looked at her. The falsehood was almost elegant because Lucasta did not say, "I composed it." She simply stepped into the silence where Sabina's name should have been and allowed admiration to settle around her. Mrs. Ellison leaned forward. What inspired the change? Lucasta reached for her teacup. Instinct, I suppose. Music should feel natural. Sabina's pulse struck once, hard. Across the room, Quentin had stopped speaking to the elderly gentleman. She did not know how long he had been listening. Mrs. Ellison frowned thoughtfully. "Yes, but the modulation is not obvious." Lady Marden described it as mournful at first, then unexpectedly consoling. Lucasta smiled. "One doesn't always know why a passage works. Sometimes one simply knows that it does." Sabina heard herself speak before caution could close over the moment. The first version resolved too early. Conversation near them quieted. Lucasta turned. Sabina continued, though her throat had tightened. The melody returned before the grief in the harmony had changed. The second version delayed the resolution, but it became too heavy. The final one keeps the lower line restrained and allows the upper voice to rise alone before they meet again. Mrs. Ellison stared at her with sudden interest. "You know the piece remarkably well," Lucasta laughed. The sound was light, almost affectionate, and sharpened only at the edge. Sabina remembers everything she copies. A few smiles appeared, not cruel ones. That almost made it worse. Sabina felt the old instinct to save the room from discomfort. She could laugh too, lower her eyes, make Lucasta's remark harmless by pretending it had not landed where intended. Instead, she looked at her cousin. Not everything. The smiles faded. Lucasta's fingers paused against the handle of her cup. Sabina added quietly, "Only the things I understand." Mrs. Ellison's brows rose. The Dowager Duchess, who had been listening from near the hearth, said nothing. Sir Eustace looked at Sabina with the expression of a man already preparing a private reprimand. Lucasta recovered first. "She has always taken copying very seriously." "So it would seem," Mrs. Ellison replied. Her tone was courteous, but something in it had changed. The conversation moved on because polite society preferred tension diluted quickly by tea. Yet the room did not quite return to what it had been. Mrs. Ellison asked Sabina 2 further questions about sacred music before another guest claimed her attention. A gentleman near the window glanced at Sabina as though seeing her for the first time. Lucasta became brighter, more charming, and slightly too quick in her replies. Quentin said nothing. He did not need to. Sabina could feel his attention like a steady line drawn through the room. Half an hour later, several guests moved into the adjoining gallery to admire a recently cleaned landscape. Sabina remained near the long windows. The Dowager Duchess was visible at the far end of the room, speaking with an elderly lady when Quentin approached at an unhurried pace and stopped at a proper distance. "Miss Kenward, Your Grace." Outside, bare branches moved against the fading light. He looked toward the gallery, where Lucasta's laughter could be heard. "Does she always call you a copyist?" Sabina might once have denied the insult. Habit urged her even now to make it smaller, only when someone asks the wrong question. And what is the wrong question? Who created something? Because the preferred question is who presented it. Sabina met his eyes. "You learn quickly." "I have had cause to." The answer carried something she could not yet place. He continued, "Is copying all you do?" The question was simple. The truth behind it was not. Sabina thought of midnight pages, corrections written by candlelight, passages no one noticed, until Lucasta performed them beautifully, and society praised her sensitivity. That depends upon whether the person answering is the one who wrote the notes. Sabina said, "Or the one wearing the prettier gown when they are played." Quentin's mouth almost changed, not quite a smile. That sounds like a dangerous distinction in some drawing rooms. Only to the person wearing the gown. He studied her for a moment. "Mrs. Ellison described the arrangement as though it had attracted attention before today. Portions of it have been played privately." "Under whose name?" Sabina's silence answered first. Quentin's expression hardened by a degree. "I see, do you?" "Not yet." His honesty surprised her. "But I see enough to know that I don't." He glanced toward the gallery, then back at Sabina. "If the arrangement is yours, can anyone besides you trace how it was made?" Sabina did not answer. Immediately, she saw the private chapel in winter, cold air slipping beneath the north door, music spread across the organ bench, a patient older voice saying, "Try it again, Miss Kenward." She remembered the first version, the second, the third. She remembered someone else hearing each one fail and change. The chapel organist. He had known the arrangement before Lucasta ever touched it. Quentin waited. He did not press for a name. That restraint mattered. Sabina looked at him. "Yes," she said, "there is someone." His gaze sharpened. "Someone who saw the work before Miss Kenward had it." Sabina held his eyes. "Someone who saw it before Lucasta ever touched it." On the 6th day of November, the private chapel at Lindenwick Park belonged to music rather than worship. No guests filled the pews. No rustle of silk disturbed the aisles. The only sounds were the low tuning of strings, the careful testing of the organ pipes, and the chapel organist, asking the same 4 measures to become something they stubbornly refused to be. Sabina stood near the rail with an ordinary rehearsal copy in her hands. The blue folio was not with her. It remained in Lucasta's possession at Kenward House, locked inside the black leather music case where Sabina had last seen it. That absence mattered, but it did not leave Sabina helpless. She knew the arrangement because she had made it. The Dowager Duchess sat several pews back beneath a carved memorial tablet, reading correspondence while remaining clearly within sight. Her presence made Sabina's participation proper and unquestionable. The organist had requested her help after struggling with a transition in the old chapel hymn intended for the charitable musicale. And Sabina had come prepared to do only what was necessary. She had not expected the work itself to remind her how different she became when no one demanded that she apologize for knowing something. Again from the lower entry, she said. The first violinist lifted his bow. The organist nodded. They began. The melody moved cleanly for several measures. Then the inner line crowded the upper voice and made the return sound heavier than it should. Sabina raised one hand. The musicians stopped. The viola is arriving too fully. The violist frowned at the page. Too loudly. Not exactly. Don't remove the line. Restrain it. Let the organ carry the weight underneath, or the melody has nowhere to rise. The organist looked toward the violist. You heard Miss Kenward. They tried again. This time the passage opened, the upper voice lifted without strain, and the harmony followed rather than smothered it. Sabina felt the difference before the final note settled. Better, she said. The organist smiled. Much. The chapel door opened quietly behind them. Sabina assumed a servant had entered with a message for the Dowager Duchess. Then her Grace looked up from her letter. Quentin. Sabina's fingers tightened slightly around the rehearsal copy. Quentin Rothbury crossed the chapel with the same measured calm he carried into drawing rooms, but he stopped well before reaching the musicians. Mother. He bowed to the Dowager, then inclined his head toward Sabina. Miss Kenward, Your Grace. The organist tapped one finger against the score. You arrive at a difficult moment. Quentin glanced toward the musicians. I hope I'm not interrupting. Only if Your Grace intends to improve the viola part. The Dowager Duchess gave a soft sound of amusement. Quentin's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. I know better than to command musicians. Sabina looked at him before she could stop herself. He noticed. She looked back at the page. The organist said, We have Miss Kenward to thank for rescuing the passage. Rescuing? Quentin asked. The arrangement was fighting itself. Sabina shook her head. It wasn't fighting itself. The parts were entering with equal insistence. Quentin moved no closer. And that is different? Very. She met his eyes. When everyone insists at once, nothing is heard clearly. Silence held for a fraction of a second. Quentin understood the meaning beneath the sentence. Sabina knew he did. The organist, unaware of the undercurrent, adjusted a loose sheet and said, Miss Kenward tried 3 versions before settling upon this one. Sabina turned toward him. The remark had been casual, harmless, yet the chapel suddenly seemed quieter. Quentin's attention sharpened. 3 versions? At least. The organist glanced at Sabina as though expecting confirmation. The first resolved too quickly. The second carried too much weight underneath. This final one came last winter. Quentin did not look at Sabina immediately. That restraint made the moment more intense, not less. Last winter? He asked. Yes, Your Grace. Miss Kenward worked through it here over several afternoons. I remember because the north door wouldn't close properly, and the cold nearly defeated us before the music did. Sabina remembered. She remembered drafts spread across the organ bench, her mother's absence still raw enough to make ordinary speech feel useless, and the strange relief of solving one measure when nothing else in life could be solved. Lucasta had not been there. She had not heard the first version collapse into a resolution too soon. She had not watched Sabina cross out the second. She had not sat through the silence before the third finally became what Sabina had intended. Yet county guests now praised Lucasta's instinct. Quentin looked at the ordinary rehearsal copy in Sabina's hands. And the version planned for the musicale follows this final one? Precisely, the organist said. The same transition, the same correction. Sabina felt exposed. Not because anything false had been said, but because the truth had now passed beyond family walls. It existed in another man's memory, in Quentin's knowledge, in a chapel where no one had asked Sir Eustace whether truth was convenient. "Shall we continue?" Sabina asked. The organist agreed. They rehearsed again. Quentin remained. He did not interrupt. He watched Sabina correct a string entry, ask the organist to hold one note slightly longer, and stop the musicians when they followed habit instead of the score. For several minutes, she forgot he was there. That was the strangest part. She forgot the Duke, forgot his rank, forgot the chapel wall, and the humiliating knowledge that he had once heard her lose control of her breath. There was only the passage before her, and the problem inside it. When the final phrase settled into silence, the organist closed his copy. There. Now it sounds as though it knows where it is going. Only because it stopped rushing to arrive, Sabina said. Quentin's gaze rested on her. Something in his expression had changed. At the drawing-room gathering 2 days earlier, he had heard her explain a piece Lucasta could not. Now he had seen musicians alter their work at Sabina's direction. He had heard an independent witness place the arrangement in her hands months before Lucasta presented it socially. The difference between suspicion and knowledge had narrowed. The musicians began packing their instruments. The Dowager Duchess remained nearby, speaking with the organist about the forthcoming charitable performance. Quentin waited until practical noise softened before addressing Sabina. "You didn't need the folio." She looked at him. "Not to remember my own work." "No." His gaze moved to the pages in her hand. "You didn't." Sabina understood what he had learned. The blue folio mattered because it held sequence, dates, crossed-out passages, and proof. But authorship had never begun with possession. "You asked whether anyone besides me could trace how the arrangement was made," she said. "I did. Now you have your answer." "Part of it." Sabina's expression cooled. "You still want more." "I want to understand the whole of what has been taken." The words were careful. She looked toward the organ loft. Belief is easy when no one asks you to lose anything for it. Quentin went still. "What do you think I have lost?" "Nothing yet." She turned back to him. "That's why belief is still easy." He did not defend himself. That surprised her more than denial would have done. "Then I suppose the question is what happens when believing you costs me something." Sabina's pulse shifted. She had expected reassurance, perhaps authority, not honesty. "And what do you suppose will happen?" "I don't know." His answer came without hesitation. "But I'd rather discover the truth than promise you a virtue I haven't yet had to prove." Before Sabina could answer, footsteps sounded from the chapel entrance. A footman entered carrying a folded note on a silver salver and approached the Dowager Duchess. She read it, then looked toward Quentin and Sabina. "News from Lady Marden," she said. "The county musicale program has been settled." Sabina's hand tightened around the rehearsal pages. The Dowager glanced once more at the message. "Miss Lucasta Kenward will perform the chapel arrangement." Sabina did not move. Quentin's gaze went to her. The Dowager Duchess finished, her expression sharpening, and the introduction credits the work to Miss Lucasta Kenward alone. 2 evenings later, Lindenwick Park glittered with candlelight, polished silver, and the careful ease of people who had never needed to ask whether they belonged in the room. Sabina entered beside Sir Eustace and Lucasta. aware from the moment they crossed the threshold that the gathering had been arranged partly around the forthcoming musicale. Music stands had been placed near the long windows. A pianoforte waited beneath the central mirror. Several guests from the county had already taken their seats, including Mrs. Ellison and Lady Marden, whose note had confirmed that Lucasta would perform the chapel arrangement under her own name. Sabina felt the knowledge settle in her chest like a weight she had learned to carry without letting it bend her posture. The blue folio remained at Kenward House, in Lucasta's possession. Sabina had not seen it since the morning call. Tonight, Lucasta had brought only clean performance copies in a narrow portfolio. That fact seemed almost deliberate. A clean copy could show the final music. It could not show where the music had begun, what had failed, or whose hand had made each correction. Lucasta wore ivory silk with a narrow green sash and received compliments before she had played a note. Sabina stood near the social edge of the room in a gown chosen more for propriety than beauty. She did not resent Lucasta for being lovely. That would have been easier. What hurt was watching society confuse presentation with creation, because presentation was what it could see. Quentin stood beside his mother near the fireplace. He greeted Sabina formally and nothing more. Yet when Lucasta took her place at the pianoforte, Sabina noticed that Quentin looked not at the performer, but first at her, only once, only long enough to tell her that he remembered the chapel rehearsal. Lucasta began. She played beautifully. Sabina had never denied that. Lucasta's touch was graceful, her timing polished, and her instinct for pleasing an audience almost flawless. The injustice did not require her to be talentless. It required only that she accept more credit than truth could bear. The arrangement unfolded through the room. Sabina knew every turn. She knew where the lower voice had once become too heavy. She knew where the melody had learned to rise alone. She knew the small pause before the final phrase because she had placed it there during the winter when her mother was dying. When the last note faded, the guests offered warm approval. Lucasta lowered her eyes modestly. Mrs. Ellison was the first to speak. "That passage in the middle is still my favorite. It has such extraordinary restraint." Lucasta smiled. "I'm glad you think so." An older lady seated beside Mrs. Ellison leaned forward. "Forgive me, Miss Kenward, but is that the same passage you mentioned was written after a family bereavement?" Sabina went still. Lucasta's hand remained on the edge of the pianoforte. "Something like that. I wondered because there is a sorrow in it without self-pity." The lady turned slightly toward Lucasta. "What made you choose that particular rising line after the second resolution?" Lucasta hesitated. It lasted no more than a heartbeat, but Sabina saw it. It simply seemed right. "Yes, but why there?" The lady was not accusing. That made the question more dangerous. Lucasta glanced down at the music. One doesn't always know why instinct chooses as it does. Sabina heard the familiar escape. Instinct, feeling, naturalness, words broad enough to hide the absence of process. She should have remained silent. Sir Eustace's presence behind her said so without speech. Yet the question had been asked in front of the very people who would soon hear Lucasta publicly credited. Sabina said, "Because if the line rose earlier, the grief would resolve before it had changed." Several heads turned. The older lady looked at her with interest. "Would you explain?" Sabina felt Lucasta's attention sharpen. She kept her voice measured. The first attempt returned too quickly. It sounded relieved before the harmony had earned relief. The second held the lower voice too heavily and made the passage sound resigned rather than transformed. The final version lets the upper line rise alone. Only then do the other voices follow. Silence settled for a moment. The older lady looked from Sabina to Lucasta. "Then was it yours?" The question entered the room without ceremony. Sabina opened her mouth. Sir Eustace answered first. "Sabina has always enjoyed helping Lucasta." Sabina turned toward him. He smiled at the guests as though generosity had explained everything. "She has a useful eye for detail, useful." The word landed with the echo of the chapel path. You should be grateful to be useful. Sabina felt the old instinct to swallow the insult and preserve the room. Instead, she looked directly at her uncle. Help is something one gives knowingly. The quietness of the sentence made it carry farther. No one applauded, no one gasped. Mrs. Ellison merely lowered her teacup. The older lady's expression changed by a fraction. Lady Marden glanced at Lucasta. That was enough. Eustace's face stiffened. Lucasta laughed softly. Sabina means only that she becomes terribly serious about music. Sabina did not rescue her. "I mean what I said." Quentin had not moved. He did not interrupt. He did not use his rank to declare a verdict. But his gaze remained on Sabina, and this time Lucasta noticed. The gathering continued because polite rooms always found a way to continue. Another guest asked for a lighter piece. Lucasta agreed too quickly. As she gathered her pages, one of the thin ties holding them slipped loose. Several sheets slid from her hands and fell across the carpet. A few landed beneath the bench. One turned face down near Sabina's shoe. Lucasta froze. The next piece depended on the pages being in order, and Sabina knew at once that Lucasta did not. The room had begun to shift with small discomforts. A gentleman bent to retrieve one sheet. Mrs. Ellison waited. Lucasta knelt briefly, gathering pages, but the sequence was already confused. Sabina could have done nothing. She could have watched Lucasta begin in the wrong place. She could have let the mistake expose how dependent Lucasta had become on music prepared by another hand. For one sharp second, temptation felt like justice. Then Sabina looked at her cousin's face. Beneath the anger and vanity was something rawer. Fear. Not fear of losing the music. Fear of being seen without the borrowed certainty around it. Sabina bent, collected the page near her shoe, and placed it on the pianoforte. "The second variation comes before that one," she said quietly. Lucasta stared at her. Sabina picked up another sheet. "This is the third. The coda follows after the marked repeat." She restored the sequence in less than a minute. Lucasta said nothing. Neither did Eustace. The next performance began without disaster. Sabina returned to the edge of the room. She did not feel noble. She felt tired, yet she knew she had chosen correctly. Justice did not require humiliation for its own sake. Later, while guests moved toward the supper room, Quentin approached her near the long windows. The Dowager Duchess remained visible nearby. "You could have let her fail," he said. Sabina looked toward Lucasta, who was speaking with Lady Marden as though nothing had happened. "Yes." "Why didn't you?" Sabina answered without hesitation. "Because I want my name returned. I don't want hers destroyed." Quentin's expression changed. Respect was too simple a word for it. He seemed to be measuring something in her that rank could neither command nor confer. Most people would have taken the opportunity. Most people haven't spent years being told that another person's success matters more than their own truth. And yet, you protected hers. I protected her from one unnecessary humiliation. I did not surrender mine. Quentin was silent. Sabina added, "Those are not the same thing." "No." His voice lowered. "They aren't." Across the room, Lucasta looked toward them. This time she did not look away quickly enough. Sabina saw the expression before charm covered it, not simple jealousy, fear. Lucasta had heard the older lady ask whether the passage belonged to Sabina. She had watched Sabina restore music she herself could not immediately order. She had seen Quentin listen, later that night, after the Kenward carriage returned home. Lucasta stood with her father outside the drawing room while Sabina continued upstairs. Why does the Duke keep looking at her as though she has said something worth hearing? Eustace's expression hardened, because men of rank sometimes mistake novelty for substance. Lucasta did not answer. She knew better now. The danger was not merely that Quentin had noticed Sabina. The danger was that other people were beginning to notice what happened. When Sabina spoke, and Lucasta had no idea how much more Quentin already knew. 3 days after the evening gathering at Lindenwick Park, Lucasta stopped pretending that Quentin Rothbury's attention toward Sabina was a passing curiosity. The morning at Kenward House had begun with rain against the windows and a silence so deliberate that even Sir Eustace seemed to hear it. Sabina had already left the breakfast room. Lucasta remained at the table with one hand beside an untouched cup of chocolate, while her father stood near the fire reading the same paragraph of the newspaper without turning the page. At last she said, "What aren't you telling me?" Eustace lowered the paper slightly. "About what? Don't do that." Her voice was controlled, but the control cost her. "You know exactly what I mean. Then perhaps you should say it." Lucasta leaned back. The Duke. Eustace's expression changed by almost nothing. It was enough. He listens when she speaks. Lucasta continued. He watches her as though every sentence matters. At the chapel rehearsal, he stayed. At the gathering, he stood there while she explained my music to my own guests. "Your music?" Eustace asked. Lucasta's mouth tightened. "You know what I mean. Then choose your words more carefully." The rebuke irritated her more because it carried truth. Lucasta looked toward the closed door through which Sabina had gone. What happened after the chapel service? Eustace folded the newspaper. "Nothing that concerns you. It concerns me if the Duke has suddenly decided Sabina is interesting. Men of rank are often attracted to novelty. You said that before, because it remains true." "No." Lucasta's fingers curled against the tablecloth. "Something changed that morning. You know what it was." Eustace did not answer. The silence stretched too long. Lucasta stood. "What aren't you telling me?" This time there was no social polish in the question, only fear. Eustace stared into the fire. When he spoke, his voice had lowered. The Duke was behind the chapel. Lucasta went still. "What?" "He was there." "When?" Eustace turned to face her. "When you spoke to Sabina." The color drained from Lucasta's face. How much did he hear? "Enough. That's not an answer. It is the only one you need." She crossed the room toward him. "Did he hear me say no one came to hear her?" Eustace's jaw hardened. Lucasta understood. Her voice dropped. "And you?" He looked away. The realization reached her slowly, then all at once. "He heard you say no one wanted her." Eustace snapped the newspaper shut. "Keep your voice down." Lucasta stared at him. She had imagined many dangers. Sabina speaking too boldly, Mrs. Ellison asking questions, the organist remembering too much, Quentin becoming curious. She had not imagined this. The Duke had heard the exact words they had believed safely private. He had watched Sabina cry afterward. No, worse. He had seen the contrast between what they called her and what she could do. Lucasta turned toward the sideboard, where one of her clean performance copies lay beneath a ribbon. She picked it up and studied the page. The notes were neat. The markings clear, the passage had been praised. Everyone had admired the transition. She had accepted the admiration. Yet when Mrs. Ellison had asked why the line rose where it did, Lucasta had not known. When the older lady had asked why the second version failed, Lucasta had watched Sabina answer without hesitation. Now, alone with the page, Lucasta searched for the logic behind the correction. She could see the result. She could not remember the problem that had produced it. The truth was more frightening than accusation. Sabina had not merely copied. She had understood. Lucasta lowered the page. "What happens if he tells people?" Eustace said. "He has no reason to create a public scandal. He doesn't need to. He only needs to keep listening to her." The words escaped more honestly than she intended. Eustace looked at her sharply. Lucasta turned back toward the table. Everyone thinks beauty and confidence are enough until someone notices the mind behind them. Do not indulge self-pity. I'm not. She folded the clean copy once along its existing crease. I'm thinking. Eustace watched her. Lucasta's breathing steadied. Fear did not leave. It changed shape. "If I can't deny," she cried. She said slowly, "Then perhaps I should explain why she did." Eustace frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning everyone already sees that the Duke notices her." Lucasta looked toward him. What if Sabina made sure he did? "Do not be foolish. She was behind the chapel. He was nearby," she cried. "Now he watches her. You know she didn't know he was there." Lucasta's eyes sharpened. "I know that. The county doesn't." For the first time that morning, Eustace said nothing. Lucasta understood the value of his silence. It was not approval. It was permission not to ask for one. That afternoon, the rain cleared, leaving the paths at Lindenwick Park dark beneath a pale November sky. Sabina walked beside Quentin beneath the lime trees, while the Dowager Duchess remained visible some distance behind them with a lady companion. The arrangement was proper. The conversation was not easy. Sabina had expected Quentin to speak of the musicale, the organist, or Lucasta's growing unease. Instead, he glanced toward the small silver cross at her throat. She had touched it without realizing. "That belonged to someone," he said. Sabina lowered her hand. "My mother." He waited. The patience in him still unsettled her. Most people, once they discovered pain, rushed to fill the silence with comfort. Quentin allowed it to remain. "She taught me the first piece I ever arranged," Sabina said. "It was very bad. How old were you?" 12. "Then I assume it was brilliantly bad." A surprised laugh escaped her. Quentin's expression softened. Sabina looked ahead before the moment could become too intimate. "She didn't flatter me. She thought praise should be honest or not given. A rare principle. She had several." Sabina touched the cross again, more deliberately this time. "When I became discouraged, she used to say, 'Don't let another person's hunger for praise teach you to doubt the sound of your own voice.'" Quentin was silent for several steps. "You remember the exact words." "I remember everything that mattered." The answer came with more feeling than she intended. He did not apologize for hearing it. They continued along the avenue. At last Quentin said, "You still do not have the folio." "No, your cousin still has it." "Yes, and your uncle refuses to return it." "Yes." He glanced at her. "Then why haven't you taken it back?" Sabina stopped walking. Quentin stopped too. "Because I am not a duke." The words landed cleanly. He did not flinch. Sabina continued, "You can command a room and call it order. I can insist upon my own property and be called ungrateful, jealous, difficult, perhaps unstable if enough people repeat it. Do you think I don't understand that?" "I think you understand power because you have it." Quentin looked at her for a long moment. That may be fair. The answer disarmed her. They resumed walking. After several paces, he said, "Command was useful to me once." Sabina glanced at him. "In the army?" "Yes." His voice remained even. "There were moments when delay cost lives. You learned to secure what mattered, remove people from danger, contain what could spread, and decide before everyone else had finished arguing." Sabina repeated the words softly. "Secure, remove, contain. Decide, yes, and when the danger isn't yours." Quentin looked at her. For the first time since she had known him, he had no quick answer. The silence mattered. Sabina saw it in his face. He had spent years being obeyed because obedience had once been necessary. That did not make him cruel. It made him dangerous in subtler ways. "I don't know," he said at last. "You don't know what?" Whether instinct distinguishes between a battlefield and a drawing room quickly enough. Sabina almost smiled. "That's an alarming confession. I thought honesty was preferable." "It is, even when alarming, especially then." They reached a small iron gate at the edge of the avenue. Quentin moved to open it. Sabina reached for the latch at the same moment. Their hands stopped less than an inch apart. Neither touched. The pause lasted only a second. Quentin withdrew first. Sabina opened the gate herself. On the other side, she looked back at him. "You could have done that." "Yes, why didn't you?" His answer came quietly. "Because you already had it." Something in her shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. At Kenward House that evening, Lucasta opened the black leather music case herself. The blue folio lay where she had kept it, its split silver clasp catching the candlelight. She placed a clean performance copy beneath it, then pressed the cover flat. "This goes with me to the musicale," she told her maid. The maid nodded. Lucasta closed the case. By then, she had already decided what she would say if Sabina claimed the music publicly. She would not deny the tears. She would give them a motive, and if the Duke had heard every word behind the chapel, Lucasta would make certain the county heard a different version of why Sabina had been there at all. The county musicale began beneath a blaze of candlelight in Lindenwick Park's Winter Gallery, where tall mirrors doubled every flame and every watching face. By the time the musicians took their places, the room had filled with county families, patronesses, elderly gentlemen, and young ladies who knew enough about music to praise it more confidently than they understood it. Sabina sat beside the Dowager Duchess, with Sir Eustace and Lucasta several chairs away. Quentin stood near the rear of the room, not hidden and not displayed, merely present with the stillness of a man who missed very little. The black leather music case rested beside the pianoforte. Sabina knew what lay inside it. The blue folio, her folio. Lucasta had carried it from Kenward House that evening, and Sabina had seen the split silver clasp when the case was opened. The sight had tightened something in her chest, but she had not looked away. Not tonight. Lucasta entered the performance space in pale satin, trimmed with narrow silver embroidery. She bowed with practiced modesty, then took her place. The first notes sounded. Sabina knew every turn before it arrived. She knew where the lower line would once have become too heavy. She knew where the melody would rise alone. She knew the exact hesitation before the final phrase, because she had written the failure that came before it, crossed it out, and tried again. The room listened. Lucasta played beautifully. That was part of the injustice. She was not without skill. She did not need to be. She had simply learned how much more impressive skill appeared when another person's thought stood behind it unseen. When the final chord faded, warm approval moved through the gallery. Lucasta rose. Mrs. Ellison smiled from the front row. The transition was even finer than I remembered. Miss Kenward, did you alter it again? Lucasta opened her mouth. Sabina felt the moment before it came. She had not planned the timing. Perhaps she had been preparing for it for years. No, she said. The word was quiet. The room heard it. Lucasta turned. Several faces followed. Sabina rose. The transition wasn't altered again. Mrs. Ellison looked between the cousins. You sound very certain. Sabina's pulse struck hard against her ribs. Sir Eustace shifted in his chair. Quentin straightened almost imperceptibly. The blue folio waited inside the open case. I am certain, Sabina said, because I arranged it. Silence moved faster than sound. Lucasta laughed first, softly, almost kindly. Sabina. The single word carried warning, so Sabina did not sit. Mrs. Ellison's expression sharpened with interest. Sir Eustace spoke. This is neither the place nor the time for a family misunderstanding. Sabina looked at him. It ceased to be private when my work became public. A murmur passed through the room. Lucasta's face remained composed, but her eyes had changed. Your work? She asked. You mean the pages you copied for me? I mean the arrangement I wrote last winter. You assisted with copying. I created 3 versions before the final passage existed. Lucasta turned toward the company with a small, helpless smile. I'm afraid my cousin has become confused. Sabina felt the blow exactly as Lucasta intended. Not dishonest. Confused. Not wronged, unstable. The language of dismissal dressed in gentler clothes. I'm not confused. No? Lucasta asked. Then perhaps you should explain why the blue folio has been in my possession all month. Her hand moved toward the music case. Sabina's breath caught. Lucasta lifted out the blue-bound folio and held it where the room could see. The split silver clasp flashed beneath the candles. My music, Lucasta said. My rehearsal material. My case. The implication settled over the room. Possession becoming proof. One lady looked down at her fan. A gentleman near the wall glanced toward Sabina, then toward Quentin. Mrs. Ellison did not move at all. Uncertainty was worse than immediate disbelief, because uncertainty gave cruelty room to dress itself as caution. Sabina stepped forward. It is mine. Lucasta smiled faintly. Then why has it been with me? Because I lent it to you for one rehearsal. And you expect everyone to accept that? Yes. Lucasta's expression hardened. Because His Grace believes you. Sabina went still. There it was. The counterattack Lucasta had prepared. This isn't about His Grace, isn't it? Lucasta looked around the room. Everyone has seen how often he listens when you speak. Sir Eustace said sharply. Lucasta. She ignored him. Perhaps we should all be honest. You cried where the Duke could hear you. You accepted his sympathy. And now you expect this room to believe that the music is yours because, for once, a powerful man has noticed you. The room changed. Not with outrage, with discomfort. One guest looked away. Another leaned back as though distance might excuse silence. Sabina felt the cold chapel wall beneath her palm again. Not literally. In memory, she heard Eustace say no one wanted her. She remembered Quentin's question. Do you wish me to pretend I did not? Her fingers grew cold, but she did not reach for the silver cross. She would not let the moment turn her back into the woman behind the chapel wall. I didn't know he was there, she said. Lucasta's smile was almost pitying. Of course you didn't. The cruelty was soft enough to sound plausible. Quentin moved. Sabina saw it from the corner of her eye. He stepped toward the pianoforte with the controlled force of a man accustomed to entering disorder and making it obey. The room made space for him without being asked. Enough, he said. Lucasta fell silent. Quentin's gaze moved from her to the blue folio, then to Sabina. For one brief second, Sabina thought he understood everything. She thought he would tell Lucasta to give it back. He did not. Quentin held out his hand. The folio. Lucasta hesitated. "Your Grace, give it to me." Sir Eustace rose. "This is a family matter." Quentin did not look at him, not any longer. Lucasta's fingers tightened around the blue cover. Under the weight of his rank and the room's attention, she surrendered it. Quentin took the folio. Sabina's heart stopped. The gesture was clean. Final, terribly familiar. Secure, remove, contain, decide. The words from the Lime Avenue came back with painful clarity. Quentin closed one hand around the split silver clasp and said, "Until the truth is established, this remains with me." The sentence struck harder than Lucasta's accusation. Sabina stared at him, the room blurred at the edges. Though her thoughts became precise, he believed he was protecting evidence. He believed he was stopping the cruelty. He believed he was preserving the one object that could prove her claim. None of that changed the fact that it was now in his hands instead of hers. "It is mine," Sabina said. Quentin looked at her. "I know." She took one step forward. "Then why are you holding it?" Silence fell with such force that she heard someone breathe behind her. Quentin opened his mouth. Nothing came. His expression changed. Not because he doubted her, because he understood the question too late. Lucasta still stood beside the pianoforte. Eustace watched as though the entire scandal could be contained if Sabina would only stop speaking. She would not. "You told me command was useful to you once," Sabina said quietly. Quentin went still. No one else in the room understood the full meaning. He did. "Miss Kenward?" "No," her voice did not rise. "You don't get to prove that something belongs to me by taking it from me." The words reached him. She saw that they did. That was not enough to make them less true. Sabina looked toward the Dowager Duchess, whose expression held no pity, only grave attention. "Your Grace, may I ask that my carriage be called?" Sir Eustace stepped forward. "You will do no such thing." Sabina turned to him. "I'm not asking you." The room became perfectly still. The Dowager Duchess rose. "My carriage will take you." Sabina inclined her head. "Thank you." Quentin still held the blue folio. Sabina did not look at it again. If she did, she might lose the dignity that remained. She walked from the winter gallery without hurrying. No one stopped her. Outside, the November air struck cold against her face. Sabina drew one breath, then another. She did not cry. Not this time. Inside the gallery, Quentin stood beneath the candlelight with the blue folio in his hands, and understood that he had done precisely what Sabina had warned him powerful people could do. He had mistaken control for protection. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the winter gallery stood dark, Quentin carried the folio to his private study. He placed it on the desk. He did not open it. The split silver clasp caught the firelight. For years, instinct had taught him that the first duty in danger was to secure what mattered. Tonight, for the first time, he understood that securing something could still mean taking it from the person to whom it belonged. By the following morning, Kenward House had resumed its usual order so perfectly that Sabina almost distrusted it. Breakfast appeared at the proper hour. The curtains were drawn back. The fire burned steadily behind the brass fender. Sir Eustace read his newspaper as though no county musicale had ended in scandal. No duke had walked away holding Sabina's folio, and no roomful of witnesses had watched her leave rather than submit to one more decision made over her head. Lucasta arrived late, pale but composed, and took her place without speaking. Sabina had already eaten. She remained because leaving too quickly would have looked like flight, and she refused to give either of them that satisfaction. The blue folio was not in the room. It was not in Lucasta's black leather music case. It was at Lindenwick Park, where Quentin had placed it unopened on his desk the night before. Sabina knew this. The knowledge sat inside her like a hard stone. Sir Eustace turned a page. "You behaved disgracefully." Sabina looked at him. "Did I? You contradicted your cousin before invited guests. I stated that I arranged the music. You created a scene." "No, the truth created a scene. I only stopped helping everyone avoid it." Lucasta's spoon touched the side of her cup. "You humiliated me." Sabina turned toward her. "You accused me of arranging my own tears to attract a duke." Lucasta's mouth tightened. "I said what the room was already wondering." "No, you said what you needed the room to wonder." Sir Eustace lowered the newspaper. "Enough." Sabina felt the familiar command move through the room. Once, that word would have ended the conversation. Today it did not. "You told them I merely copied music," she said. "You do copy music, and I arrange it. Under this roof. That doesn't make it yours." Eustace's expression hardened. "You are becoming intolerably self-important." Sabina felt something in her become calm. The accusation had lost power because she finally understood its purpose. A woman who claimed what belonged to her could be called vain. A dependent who stopped giving could be called ungrateful. Anyone who refused erasure could be called difficult by those who had benefited from silence. "Perhaps," she said, "you only preferred me when I was useful enough to help and quiet enough not to be named." Lucasta stood abruptly. "I won't sit here and listen to this." Sabina looked at her. "Then don't." Lucasta stared as though permission itself had become insolence. She left the room without another word. Sir Eustace waited until the door closed. "You have endangered your position in this house." Sabina's pulse changed. There it was. Not affection, not concern, position. By claiming my own work, by forgetting your dependence. "I haven't forgotten it for a single day." The answer silenced him. Sabina rose slowly. "That is precisely why I remember what belongs to me." She left before he could reply. The formal call came shortly before noon. The butler announced the Dowager Duchess of Ardenshaw first, then His Grace, the Duke of Ardenshaw. Sabina was in the drawing room with Sir Eustace when they entered. Lucasta had not reappeared. The dowager wore dark green silk beneath a travelling mantle. Her manner composed enough to make everyone else appear less so. Quentin followed, carrying the blue folio in both hands. Sabina saw it immediately. The split silver clasp, the familiar blue cloth, her own worn corners. He did not hold it like evidence now. He held it like something that did not belong to him. Sir Eustace rose. "Your Graces." Formal greetings were exchanged. Tea was offered and declined. No one pretended the visit was social. Quentin stepped forward. He stopped at a proper distance from Sabina and placed the folio on the table between them. "This belongs to you. No explanation, no condition, no request." Sabina looked at him, then at the folio. "You brought it back." "Yes." "Have you opened it?" "No." Quentin's voice remained steady. "It stayed closed on my desk all night." Sabina did not touch it at once. Why? He understood the question. Not why had he returned it. Why had he taken it? "I thought evidence had to be secured." The words sounded different now. Smaller, less like authority and more like confession. Sabina looked at the split silver clasp. "And now I know that securing something isn't always the same as protecting it." She raised her eyes to his. "You knew it was mine." "Yes." "You said so." "Yes." "And you still took it." Quentin did not defend himself. "Yes." The Dowager Duchess remained silent. Sir Eustace shifted near the mantel. Sabina reached for the folio. Her fingers touched the cover first, then the clasp. She opened it herself. The pages were intact, the first version. The second, the crossed measures, the corrected entries. Nothing had been removed. Nothing added, nothing disturbed. Relief moved through her so sharply that she almost resented it. She closed the folio and kept one hand on it. I cannot trust a man who takes my work away in order to prove it belongs to me. Something in Quentin's face changed, but he did not flinch. You shouldn't. Silence followed. He offered no explanation, no defense, no request that she notice his good intentions. The absence of argument reached Sabina more deeply than apology might have done. Sir Eustace gave an impatient sound. Surely this has gone far enough. Sabina turned toward him. No. He stared. You will not speak to me in that tone. Then listen to the words instead. The room went still. Sabina placed both hands on the folio. I will not arrange, correct, or copy another piece of music that is to be presented publicly under Lucasta's sole credit. Sir Eustace's complexion darkened. You will do what is required of you in this house. No, you owe this family gratitude. Gratitude isn't ownership. You have no independent income worth speaking of, no husband, no establishment. Do you imagine society will reward this display? Sabina felt the old fear rise. Dependence, reputation, loneliness. The same weapons polished and presented as facts. She did not deny them. She simply refused to kneel before them. Then let the silence be honest for once. No one moved. Sir Eustace looked as though he had expected tears, apology, or retreat. Sabina gave him none. If Lucasta performs music she didn't create, I will not help her disguise that fact. If she uses my past work, I will say so. If she asks for new work without credit, I will refuse. Eustace's voice dropped. You are determined to ruin your cousin. No, Sabina answered at once. I want my name returned. I don't want hers destroyed. Quentin looked at her with an expression she could not yet bear to interpret. Respect, perhaps. Regret, certainly. Neither changed what had happened, but the folio was no longer in his hands. That mattered. The Dowager Duchess finally spoke. A very clear distinction. Sir Eustace bowed stiffly. Your Grace, with respect, this remains a family matter. The Dowager's gaze settled on the blue folio. Not when the family matter is performed before half the county. Eustace had no safe answer. The call ended soon after. Quentin did not ask forgiveness again. He did not ask to see the folio. He did not ask Sabina to trust him. At the door, he looked back once. Miss Kenward. She met his gaze. Your Grace, I am sorry. The simplicity of it hurt more than excuses would have done. Sabina inclined her head. She did not forgive him. Not yet. But she believed the apology because he had returned what he could have kept. After the carriage departed, Sabina carried the folio upstairs herself and placed it on her writing table. She opened it again, not to search for damage, but to see her own hand. Pages of work lay before her, some beautiful, some clumsy, some unfinished, all hers. For years she had thought the only choices were to fight over old music already taken or surrender it for peace. Now another possibility rose before her. She drew a fresh sheet of paper closer. No one had asked her to work. No one waited to wear the result as ornament. Sabina dipped her pen. She would not merely defend what she had made before. She would finish something new, and this time her own name would stand above it. 2 days after Quentin returned the blue folio, Sabina carried it herself to Lindenwick Park. She kept it closed on her lap during the 5-mile carriage journey, one gloved hand resting lightly over the split silver clasp, while bare hedgerows passed beneath a cold November sky. No one at Kenward House had asked where she was going. Sir Eustace had learned that questions could become uncomfortable when Sabina answered them plainly. And Lucasta had spent most of the morning behind a closed door with her maid. Sabina did not mistake silence for defeat. She knew too well what resentment looked like when it was gathering breath. The private chapel at Lindenwick was quieter than it had been during the earlier rehearsal. The organist stood near the instrument, sorting ordinary music sheets, while weak winter light fell through the high windows and rested across the worn wood of the gallery rail. The Dowager Duchess was in the adjoining gallery with her companion, close enough for propriety. Sabina had made certain of that before entering. The organist looked up. "Miss Kenward, I hadn't expected you today. I hoped I might ask you something. If it's about the lower entry, I've already bullied the viola into behaving." A small laugh escaped her. "No, something else." She placed the blue folio on the bench beside her, but did not open it yet. "Does the charitable performance later this month still require an arrangement?" The organist studied her more closely. "It does." "Then I would like to offer one." His expression brightened. "Yours." The word touched a place inside her that had been wounded so often she had stopped expecting simple language to feel kind. "Yours." Not family music, not useful assistance, not Lucasta's improved presentation. Hers? Yes. Sabina opened the folio herself and drew out several fresh sheets she had placed between two blank protective pages that morning. The original folio remained whole and intact. The new arrangement was written separately in her own hand. "I began it after the musicale." The organist accepted the loose pages with care. He did not flatter her. Sabina respected him for that. He read the first page, then the second. His brow tightened at one passage. "This middle section is too full. I feared it might be." "You intended that? I hoped it would work." "It doesn't," Sabina almost smiled. "Then at least I asked the right man." They spent the next half hour going through the arrangement. Sabina altered one entrance, removed two unnecessary measures, and simplified the organ line. By the end, the music had begun to breathe. Not perfectly, not yet, but honestly. The organist placed the sheets down. "I would be glad to use this." Sabina did not answer at once. Acceptance mattered. The condition mattered more. "There is one requirement." He waited. "It must be introduced as the work of Miss Sabina Kenward." No hesitation followed. Of course. The ease of the answer almost hurt. Sabina had prepared herself for persuasion, discomfort, perhaps even a gentle suggestion that family harmony mattered more than accuracy. Instead, he merely nodded, as though a person's name naturally belonged beside the work that person had created. Perhaps justice did not always arrive with thunder. Perhaps sometimes it began when someone refused to find truth inconvenient. "Thank you," she said. The organist lifted the fresh sheets again. "Will you prepare the rehearsal copies?" "Yes, ordinary copies only. The folio remains with me." "Quite right." Sabina closed the blue cover herself. Before she could rise, the chapel door opened. Quentin entered, then stopped when he saw her. His gaze moved once to the folio in her hands and returned immediately to her face. He did not ask to see it. That mattered. "Miss Kenward." "Your Grace." The organist explained that Sabina had offered a new arrangement for the charitable performance. Quentin listened without interruption. "Under her own name," the organist added. Something quiet changed in Quentin's expression. Pride would have offended her. Approval might have felt too close to permission. What she saw instead was recognition. "Then I look forward to hearing it," he said. Sabina studied him. You knew nothing of this before now? No. No one suggested it to you? No. And you didn't arrange for me to be asked? His answer came without defensiveness. I didn't. Sabina nodded. Good. The organist looked down, perhaps to hide a smile. Quentin did not. I suspect that's the first time a woman has told me. She is pleased I did nothing. Then you should treasure the novelty. His mouth almost curved. I may. The moment might have softened further, but footsteps sounded from the chapel entrance. Sir Eustace appeared with Lucasta beside him. Sabina went still. Lucasta had clearly learned where she was. Her expression was composed, but the brightness in it had the brittle edge of anger polished for company. There you are, she said. We wondered where you'd gone. Sabina closed the clasp of the folio. I came to speak with the organist. Eustace looked at the loose pages on the bench. About what? The organist answered before Sabina could. Miss Kenward has offered an arrangement for the charitable performance. Lucasta's gaze shifted to Sabina. Has she? Yes, Sabina said. It will be introduced under my own name. Silence followed. Lucasta laughed first. How theatrical. Sabina looked at her. Accuracy isn't theatrical. No, but public revenge often is. Quentin's expression hardened, but he remained silent. Sabina noticed. He was waiting. Lucasta continued. Everyone already knows the Duke has taken an interest in you. Now you suddenly have a public performance at his estate. How convenient. I asked the organist, because you knew he would say yes, because I had work to offer. Eustace stepped forward. This will not happen. Sabina turned toward him. Why? Because enough damage has been done. To whom? To this family. By telling the truth. By insisting upon public spectacle. Sabina felt the old pressure rise. Family, gratitude, position, dependence. She had heard every variation. I am not asking Lucasta to leave the program. How generous, Lucasta said. Sabina ignored her. I am not asking anyone to announce what happened at the musicale. I am presenting new work under my own name. Eustace's jaw tightened. You will withdraw it. No, you are living under my roof. That does not make my mind part of the rent. The organist looked down. The Dowager Duchess, now visible in the adjoining gallery entrance, said nothing. Quentin remained where he was. Eustace's voice dropped. I forbid it. Sabina's heart beat harder. He still had power over her circumstances. She did not pretend otherwise. Courage was not the absence of dependence. It was the refusal to let dependence rename truth. You may refuse to attend, she said. You may be angry. You may tell every guest in Kent that I am ungrateful, but you may not claim ownership of work you did not create. Lucasta's composure broke by a fraction. And what happens when people say you're only doing this because His Grace favors you? Sabina turned toward Quentin then, not for rescue, for one fact. Your Grace is the late November charitable performance at Lindenwick, open to invited county guests. Quentin answered only what she asked. Yes. Was that true before I offered my arrangement? Yes. Will the guest list be changed because my work is included? No. Sabina looked back at Lucasta. Then there is your answer. Quentin said nothing more. The restraint carried more weight than any defense he could have offered. Eustace looked from Sabina to the Duke and understood, perhaps for the first time, that rank would not be used to silence her or speak for her. That left him with the one thing he had always feared most. Sabina's own voice. Lucasta's face went pale. You think they'll hear a difference? Sabina held the blue folio against herself. I think they should be allowed to hear what is mine without being told it is yours. No one answered. Later, as Sabina prepared to leave, She handed the organist the ordinary rehearsal pages and kept the original folio in her own possession. Quentin stood near the chapel door. He did not offer to carry it. He only stepped aside. Sabina passed him, then paused. "Thank you." He looked at her. "For what?" "For answering only the question I asked." Something in his face softened. "I am learning." Sabina inclined her head and walked on. Behind her, Lucasta remained beside Eustace in the chapel's cold light. "What happens if they hear the difference?" she asked him quietly. For the first time, Sir Eustace Kenward had no answer to give. By the 20th day of November, the charitable performance had begun to feel less like an event, and more like a question the entire county was waiting to hear answered. Sabina knew that from the moment her carriage turned into the long drive at Lindenwick Park, and she saw 3 additional carriages already standing near the house. Some guests had arrived early under the pretense of calling upon the Dowager Duchess. Others had sent notes asking whether the musical program remained unchanged. Rumor had traveled faster than accuracy, as it usually did. Sabina carried the blue folio herself when she entered the private chapel. The split silver clasp rested beneath her gloved fingers. She had brought it because the final rehearsal belonged to her, and so did the history of the music. The organist was already at the instrument. 2 violinists and a violist adjusted their pages beneath the gallery rail, each working from ordinary rehearsal copies. The original folio remained in Sabina's possession. The Dowager Duchess sat near the front with her companion, while a maid arranged additional candles for the darker end of the chapel. Quentin stood beside one of the narrow windows, speaking quietly with the organist. When Sabina entered, he looked toward her at once. His gaze moved briefly to the folio, then returned to her face. He did not approach until she had placed her gloves beside the organ bench, and the Dowager Duchess had acknowledged her presence. "Miss Kenward, Your Grace. The organist tells me the final section is ready." Almost. The musicians are still too polite with it." Quentin glanced toward the players. "An unusual fault. A common one. People often soften what should be honest because they fear sounding harsh." His eyes returned to hers. "And does that apply only to music?" Sabina met his gaze. "Rarely." For the briefest moment, warmth moved between them. Then the organist called for the first run-through, and Sabina turned toward the musicians. The rehearsal began. The opening was clean. The middle section held. The final passage, however, arrived with too much restraint. Sabina raised one hand. The music stopped. "Again from the second entry," she said, "and don't protect the final phrase from itself." The first violinist frowned. "More force, more truth." The organist smiled. "You heard Miss Kenward." They began again. This time the sound rose with greater confidence. It did not become loud. It became certain. Sabina felt the difference immediately. So did everyone else. The final chord faded into the chapel's high stone space and remained there for one suspended moment before disappearing. "That," Sabina said quietly. "Keep that." The players began marking their copies. The organist moved to speak with one of them. The Dowager Duchess was drawn into conversation with her companion. Quentin waited. Sabina knew he wanted to speak before he took a step toward her. She also knew he was making certain she saw the approach. That mattered. "May I ask you something?" he said. "You may ask." "What do you want from me when the room turns against you?" Sabina had expected the question eventually. She had not expected it to be so direct. She rested one hand on the blue folio. Nothing at first. Quentin absorbed that without visible surprise. Nothing. Not even if Lucasta interrupts. Not at first. If your uncle does, not at first. His jaw tightened by a fraction. And if the room begins to doubt you, Sabina looked at him steadily. Then the room doubts me. You say that very calmly. I am not calm. The honesty startled him. Sabina continued. I am frightened. That doesn't mean I want you to take over. He looked toward the chapel doors, then back at her. Then tell me what you do want. Sabina drew a breath. I will carry the folio. I will open it. I will speak first. Quentin nodded once. Agreed. You may speak about what you personally heard and what you personally did. But you won't build my case for me. He held her gaze. Agreed. And if watching me struggle becomes difficult for you, that is not the same as danger. Something in his expression shifted. The words had found their mark. No, he said, it isn't. Sabina's fingers tightened lightly against the folio. Can you stand in a room where I may fail and not take command of it? For several seconds he said nothing. The chapel seemed to narrow around the question. Then Quentin answered, I don't know whether instinct will stop. Sabina waited. He continued. But action will. She studied him. That is not the same as promising you won't want to intervene. No. Good. Quentin's mouth shifted faintly. You prefer unpleasant honesty. I prefer useful honesty. I am beginning to notice. The organist called for a short pause. The musicians left the gallery for refreshment. The Dowager Duchess remained nearby, still within sight. Sabina opened the blue folio to check one of the dated pages. Quentin's gaze fell to the split silver clasp. He lifted one hand, then stopped before touching it. May I? Sabina knew immediately what he meant. She also knew what it cost him to ask. The folio had once sat in his hands because he had decided it should. Now he stood beside it and waited. Sabina looked at his hand, then at his face. No, Quentin lowered his hand. Very well. No offense, no persuasion, no wounded pride. He simply accepted the answer. The simplicity of it unsettled her more than charm would have done. Sabina closed the folio. You could have asked why. You said no. And that's enough. It has to be. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She looked away toward the chapel rail. You are learning quickly. Not quickly enough. She glanced back at him. Regret remained in his expression, but it no longer asked to be comforted. It had become discipline. No, Sabina said. Not quickly enough. He accepted that too. The musicians returned, and rehearsal resumed. Quentin moved back toward the side of the chapel. He did not hover. He did not advise. He did not stand beside the organist as though authority could improve the score. Sabina led the final run-through. The last passage rose, stronger than before. When it ended, the organist nodded once. Ready. Sabina looked down at the blue folio. 4 days remained before the charitable performance on the 24th. In 4 days, the same chapel would contain Lucasta, Eustace, county guests, patronesses, musicians, and every version of the truth people had chosen to believe. Her hands were cold. She was still afraid. Proof did not make courage unnecessary. It only gave courage somewhere to stand. As the musicians began gathering their sheets, Sabina turned and found Quentin waiting near the aisle. She crossed toward him before she could reconsider. He seemed surprised when she stopped beside him. Your Grace, Miss Kenward. Sabina looked at his hand. Then, deliberately, she placed her own gloved fingers into it, only for a moment, only long enough to make the choice unmistakable. Quentin did not tighten his hold. He did not lift her hand. He simply received what she had given. Sabina withdrew first. That, she said quietly, was permission. Something deep in his expression changed. I understood. Good. She took up the folio herself. 4 days from now, Lucasta would arrive at the charitable performance, believing beauty, possession, and practiced confidence might still outlast truth. Sabina intended to discover whether the room was ready to hear the difference. On the 24th of November, the private chapel at Lindenwick Park filled before noon with people who claimed they had come for charity and music, though Sabina knew curiosity had travelled faster than either. County families occupied the pews. Patronesses murmured behind gloved hands. Elderly gentlemen who had contributed to the charitable subscription spoke in low voices near the aisle. The organist stood beside the instrument, checking the ordinary rehearsal copies already placed for the musicians. Sabina arrived from Kenward House, carrying the blue folio herself. No servant touched it. No one offered to take it from her. The split silver clasp rested beneath her gloved fingers as she crossed the chapel, and every step seemed to carry the weight of all the times she had been told that silence was gratitude. Quentin stood near one of the stone columns to the side. He did not approach her. He did not ask whether she was ready. He only met her eyes. 4 days earlier, she had told him she would carry the folio, speak first, and be allowed to fail without him taking command. His stillness now was not absence. It was obedience to the promise he had made. The Dowager Duchess sat near the front with Mrs. Ellison and Lady Marden. Lucasta arrived moments later in pale blue silk, composed enough to suggest confidence and pale enough to betray the effort behind it. Sir Eustace followed. He looked irritated rather than anxious, as though authority had never yet failed him, and therefore could not possibly begin today. The program opened with 2 short instrumental pieces. Sabina heard them only in fragments. Her hands were cold. The folio remained closed on her lap. When the second piece ended, the organist rose. The next arrangement will be presented as the work of Miss Sabina Kenward. A stir passed through the chapel. Sabina stood. So did Lucasta. I object. The words cut across the room cleanly. The organist went still. Quentin did not move. Good. Sabina carried the folio toward the small table near the organ. Lucasta turned toward the assembled guests. I had hoped this spectacle might be avoided, but apparently my cousin intends to continue it. Sabina placed the folio on the table. Continue what? Lucasta's eyes flashed, pretending that copying music makes you its creator. A murmur moved through the pews. Sabina touched the split silver clasp. Then let us begin where the music began. She opened the folio herself. Inside lay the dated drafts, crossed measures, early versions, and corrections that no clean performance copy could contain. Sabina turned to the first set of pages. This was the earliest version. Lucasta gave a soft laugh. A page filled with alterations proves nothing, not by itself. Sabina looked toward the organist. He stepped forward. I remember this version. Lucasta's expression changed by a fraction. The organist continued. Miss Kenward worked on the arrangement here last winter. I heard the first version fail. I heard the second become too heavy beneath the melody. I heard the third settle into the form later performed publicly. Mrs. Ellison leaned forward. You witnessed all 3. I did. Sabina turned one page. The first version resolved too soon. She nodded to the musicians. They played the brief passage. The ending arrived quickly, almost before the emotion inside the harmony had time to change. Sabina opened to the second version. This one delayed the resolution, but carried too much weight underneath. The musicians played again. The lower voice crowded the melody. Then Sabina turned to the corrected page, and this was the final version. The third passage rose through the chapel, restrained at first, then opening with the quiet certainty the room had already admired once under another woman's name. Silence followed. Not applause, not triumph, just recognition. Lucasta's face had lost color. "You expect everyone to believe this proves authorship," she said. "I expect them to listen. You copied for me. I created the sequence you performed. You filled pages with corrections. That doesn't make the music yours." Sabina looked at her, then answered one question. Lucasta lifted her chin. Sabina touched the first draft. "What problem were you solving when you changed the first version into the second?" Lucasta said nothing. Sabina waited. The silence lengthened. "You claim the work," Sabina said. "What were you changing?" Lucasta's mouth tightened. "I don't remember every trivial detail. It wasn't trivial when you were praised for it." The chapel became perfectly still. Lucasta looked toward Quentin. "You're doing this for him." Sabina followed her gaze. Quentin remained beside the stone column. He had not spoken. He had not moved. Then Sabina looked back at her cousin. "No, I am answering for my own work." Sir Eustace rose. "This has gone far enough." Sabina faced him. "Not yet. You forget yourself." "No, I remember myself very clearly." His expression hardened. "Whatever music you produced was made under my roof. It should have served the family." The words landed more heavily than denial. Several guests turned toward him. Sabina felt something inside her become still, not numb, certain. "Then why?" she asked. "Was my name the only thing the family could not use?" No one answered. Mrs. Ellison looked from the original folio to Lucasta. Lady Marden lowered her eyes for a moment. Lucasta tried again. "Everyone accepted the arrangement as mine." Mrs. Ellison's voice came quietly. "Because you allowed us to." Lucasta stared at her. No one rushed to speak. That pause mattered. It was the moment in which excuses might still have survived if there had been any left. There were not. The Dowager Duchess rose. "I will not sponsor introductions for a young woman whose reputation depends upon another woman's silence." Lucasta went white. Lady Marden spoke next. "Nor will Miss Lucasta Kenward remain in the winter charitable program." A second patroness nodded, only after looking once more at the folio and then at Sir Eustace. "I agree." The consequences did not arrive as a storm. They arrived as doors quietly closing. Sir Eustace stepped forward. "This is an overreaction." Quentin's hand tightened once at his side. Sabina saw it. He did not interrupt. He waited. Eustace continued. "A family disagreement should not destroy my daughter's prospects." Only then did Quentin speak. No. Every head turned. Quentin stepped into the aisle, but no farther. "I heard Sir Eustace and Miss Lucasta Kenward speak to Miss Sabina Kenward beside this chapel on the first Sunday of the month. I heard them tell her that no one came to hear her. I heard Sir Eustace tell her that no one wanted her." Lucasta's face tightened. Quentin continued. "Later, when the dispute became public, I took Miss Kenward's folio without her permission. I told myself I was securing evidence." His gaze moved to Sabina. "In truth, I repeated the same error I claimed to oppose. I treated what was hers as something I had the right to control." The chapel was utterly silent. Quentin did not soften the admission. "I returned it, because protecting proof did not give me the right to possess it." Sir Eustace looked furious. "You cannot seriously intend to ruin Lucasta's future over this." Quentin's expression cooled. "Her future is not mine to ruin or restore. My patronage is mine to withdraw." Eustace had no answer. Sabina closed the blue folio. She did not need another victory. The organist moved toward the music stand. Then he looked at her. "Not at Lucasta, not at Quentin, at Sabina. Shall we begin?" Sabina drew one breath. Her hands were still cold. Her fear had not disappeared. That no longer mattered. Yes. She gave the final cue. The musicians began. Her new arrangement rose through the chapel under her own name. Quentin remained where he was. Lucasta sat rigidly beside her father. The Dowager Duchess listened without moving. Sabina stood beside the closed folio and heard the music become itself. When the final chord faded, no one rushed to fill the silence. For once, silence did not erase her. It held what had been proved. It held what had been returned. It held her name. After the guests departed, Quentin sent no message and made no demand. The next morning, at Kenward House, the butler entered carrying a silver salver. Upon it rested a single calling card from His Grace, the Duke of Ardenshaw. Sabina looked at it for a long moment. Then she said, "I will receive him." The following afternoon, Quentin came to Kenward House with his mother. Sabina knew from the formality of the call that he intended to ask something he would not disguise as accident. The Dowager Duchess entered first and accepted tea from a visibly strained Sir Eustace, who had not forgiven the events at Lindenwick Chapel, and had not yet discovered a way to challenge them without repeating the very argument that had exposed him. Lucasta did not appear. Sabina suspected pride rather than illness. Quentin waited until the conversation had settled and propriety was beyond question before turning to her. He did not begin with apology. He had already apologized. He did not praise her courage or remind her what he had done at the chapel. He simply said, "Miss Kenward, may I court you?" The directness of it stopped the room. Sabina felt the Dowager Duchess become very still beside her teacup. Sir Eustace's face tightened. Quentin did not look at either of them. He looked only at Sabina. She had known admiration before. Though rarely directed at her, she had known usefulness, dependence, gratitude demanded as obedience, and the strange ache of being noticed only after another person had worn the result of her work. This was different, yet difference was not enough. She had spent too long learning that a woman's gratitude could be mistaken for consent. "I need time," she said. Quentin nodded once. "Then you have it." He did not ask how much. He did not attempt to persuade her before leaving. 3 days later, after a long morning in which Sabina tried to decide whether fear was warning her away from him or merely reminding her what trust had once cost, she sent word that she would receive another formal call. That call became another. By the end of November, she agreed to a courtship. Winter settled over Kent slowly. The lime avenue at Lindenwick lost its last leaves. Frost silvered the lawns. Carriage wheels cut dark tracks through wet roads between Kenward House and Lindenwick Park. Quentin came openly and properly. He did not crowd her with attention or manufacture excuses to be alone. Sometimes the Dowager Duchess sat nearby with embroidery, while Sabina and Quentin spoke beside the fire. Sometimes Mrs. Ellison or another caller joined them. Once, Sabina declined an invitation to dine at Lindenwick because she wished to remain home and finish a difficult passage. Quentin said, "Very well." Nothing more. No wounded silence. No repeated request. The simplicity of his acceptance stayed with her. On another afternoon, he stood beside the pianoforte while Sabina examined a score. His hand moved toward the page as though to turn it for her, then stopped. "May I?" he asked. Sabina looked at him. Yes, only then did he touch the paper. Such moments would have seemed trivial to anyone who had never been denied small choices. To Sabina, they were evidence. Still, Quentin did not become perfect, and she would not have trusted perfection if he had pretended to it. In January, during a rehearsal at Lindenwick, the flaw in him returned. Sabina was guiding, two violinists through a difficult passage when Quentin, standing near the chapel rail, said, "Take it more slowly from the second measure." The musicians obeyed before Sabina could answer. The old command had been effortless, immediate. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Sabina looked at Quentin. Should they? He frowned. Should they what? Take it more slowly. The question hung between them. The violinists stared at their music. The organist became extremely interested in a pencil mark on his page. Quentin's first instinct showed in his face. He had reasons. He could explain why slower phrasing might help. He could defend the suggestion as useful. Sabina watched all of that pass through him. Then he said, "No, I spoke too quickly." Sabina did not soften the moment for him. "You did." Quentin turned to the musicians. "Ignore me." One of the violinists looked uncertain. "Your Grace." "Miss Kenward is directing the rehearsal." The man nodded. Sabina resumed from the second measure at the original tempo. The passage worked. Afterward, Quentin joined her near the chapel door. "I was right about the phrasing," he said. Sabina looked at him, then his mouth shifted. "I am told that honesty is useful." She almost smiled. "You were wrong about who was deciding." "Yes, and those aren't the same question." "No." He looked toward the emptying chapel. "I disliked not interfering." "I know." "You knew?" "You looked like a man trying not to invade a small country." A quiet laugh escaped him. "Was it that obvious?" "To me." The humor faded, but the warmth remained. Sabina realized then that disagreement with him no longer felt dangerous. She did not have to protect his pride before speaking. He did not punish her distance or turn her refusal into ingratitude. They could be uncomfortable and remain safe. December gave way to January, then February. Quentin never asked to keep the blue folio. He never opened it unless Sabina chose to show him a page. At Lindenwick, it was kept wherever Sabina placed it. At Kenward House, it remained in her own possession. Lucasta withdrew from musical gatherings tied to Ardenshaw patronage. Sir Eustace remained civil when rank required it and cold when it did not. Sabina no longer arranged music for Lucasta. The silence that followed was honest, exactly as she had promised. By March, the first signs of spring had begun to soften the Kent fields. One afternoon, Sabina sat at the pianoforte in Lindenwick's music room, while the Dowager Duchess and two guests spoke in the adjoining drawing room. Quentin listened as Sabina finished a new arrangement and let the final chord fade. "You changed the ending," he said. "I did." "Why?" "The old version asked for resolution too soon." He looked at her, a familiar mistake. Sabina smiled faintly. "Yes." He came no closer until she turned fully toward him. "Sabina." It was the first time he used her name in such a moment, and the quietness of it altered the room. "I need to ask you something." Her heart quickened. "Then ask." Quentin's expression was steady, but not untouched by feeling. "You know what I am when instinct moves faster than judgment. I may still want to decide too quickly. I may still mistake action for protection." Sabina said nothing. "I cannot promise that impulse will vanish." He paused. "I can promise that your no will remain yours. Your work will remain yours. Your choices will remain yours, even when I dislike them." The restraint in his voice moved her more than grand declarations might have done. He continued, "Will you marry me?" Sabina looked at the man who had heard her cry behind a chapel wall, believed her before society did, failed her when command overtook judgment, returned what he had taken, and then spent months proving that change was behavior rather than apology. "I don't choose you because you heard me cry," she said. Quentin's breath shifted. "I know. I choose you because when I told you to return what was mine, you did. His eyes held hers. Sabina continued, and because you kept returning things after that. Choice, space, silence when it belonged to me. Quentin's composure almost broke. Is that a yes? Sabina let him wait one heartbeat longer. It's a yes. He looked at her hand but did not take it. May I? Yes. His fingers closed around hers gently. No possession, no rescue. Only a choice answered by another choice. Their engagement was announced soon afterward. The wedding was set for late May. Sabina did not leave Kenward House as a discarded dependent being lifted into importance by a duke. She left it months later as a woman whose name had already been restored before marriage could add another title to it. Just over 7 months had passed since the first Sunday of November, when Sabina stepped once more into the private chapel at Lindenwick Park. Now on the first Sunday of June 1819, with sunlight lying warm across the stone floor and her name printed correctly in the service program. She had been married to Quentin for less than 2 weeks. The ceremony had taken place in late May, quietly enough to preserve what mattered and publicly enough that no one could pretend uncertainty about her place beside him. Yet the greatest change in Sabina's life was not that she had become Duchess of Ardenshaw. Titles could alter how rooms received a woman. They could not explain whether she had learned to trust the room itself. That answer lived in smaller things. The blue folio remained in her own cabinet in the music room at Lindenwick, and Quentin had never moved it without asking. Her arrangements were credited under her name. Invitations came to her directly. She accepted some and declined others. When she said no, no one corrected the word into ingratitude. Sir Eustace still held his baronetcy and his house. He had not been ruined, nor had Sabina wished ruin upon him. He had simply lost what he had once assumed permanent. He no longer enjoyed the easy favor of Ardenshaw. He no longer decided where Sabina's work went, or whose reputation it served. Lucasta, meanwhile, remained outside the social circle that had once seemed assured. The promised introductions had not been restored. The charitable patronesses who had withdrawn from her did not reverse themselves merely because several months had passed. Sabina did not celebrate that either. She had meant what she once told Quentin. She wanted her name returned. She did not want Lucasta destroyed. Still, mercy did not require access. Sabina had not arranged another note for her cousin. The silence that followed had remained honest. That Sunday morning, the chapel organist turned towards Sabina before beginning the central hymn arrangement. He did not announce a family contribution. He did not soften authorship into assistance. The printed program read plainly: arrangement by Her Grace, the Duchess of Ardenshaw, formerly Miss Sabina Kenward. Sabina had considered removing the final words. In the end, she had left them. She had not ceased to be the woman who wrote the music before anyone believed her. Beside her, Quentin noticed the line and said nothing. He had learned that silence could be respect. The organ began. The familiar hymn rose through the chapel, no longer borrowed, hidden, or presented beneath another woman's name. Sabina listened without searching the room for reactions. That, too, was new. Mrs. Ellison sat 3 pews ahead and followed the music with visible attention. The Dowager Duchess listened with her usual composed stillness. Quentin remained beside Sabina. He did not watch the musicians. He watched her only once. And when she met his eyes, he looked away first with the smallest suggestions of a smile, as though he understood that the music did not require his witness to become true. After the final prayer, guests drifted toward the house and waiting carriages. Sabina remained in the chapel a little longer, speaking with the organist about one passage she wished to revise before autumn. Quentin waited near the door. He did not hurry her. When at last they stepped outside, the June air was warm enough that Sabina carried her gloves rather than wearing them. The yews were full and green now. The earth smelled of grass and sun-warmed stone instead of November rain. They walked without speaking until they reached the eastern wall behind the chapel. Sabina stopped. Quentin stopped beside her. The place was the same. The stone was unchanged. Yet she no longer felt that the wall remembered her weakness. It remembered a truth she had survived. Quentin looked at the place where he had once found her trying to steady her breathing with one hand against the cold stone. "Do you wish I hadn't heard them?" he asked. Sabina turned toward him. He did not mean Lucasta's music. He meant the words from that first morning. "No one comes to hear you. No one wants you." Sabina reached beneath the edge of her light summer mantle and touched the small silver cross resting on its narrow black ribbon. "No." Quentin waited. She looked back at the chapel. "But I'm glad hearing me wasn't the last thing you learned to do." Something softened in his face. "So am I." She glanced at him. "You were very bad at it for a while. I have been informed, repeatedly, by a reliable authority." Sabina smiled. "She sounds difficult." "Terribly. And yet you married her. A failure of judgment, perhaps." "Your old weakness?" "One of them." The humor faded gently rather than abruptly. Quentin looked toward the path. "Do you want to go back to the house?" Sabina considered the question. Once, people had decided where she should go before she had even known she had been asked. Now Quentin waited. She looked toward the chapel gallery above. "Not yet." He inclined his head. "Then not yet." They returned inside by the side door. The chapel had emptied completely. The organist had gone. The lingering warmth of the service remained in the wood and stone. But the silence belonged to them. Sabina climbed the narrow stair to the gallery with Quentin several steps behind. On the bench near the organ waited the blue-bound folio. She had brought it that morning to compare an earlier notation after the service. No servant had carried it. No one else had handled it. Sabina crossed the gallery and placed one hand over the blue cloth cover. The split silver clasp was still broken. Quentin had once suggested, carefully, that a silversmith could repair it. Sabina had declined. He had never asked again. She opened the folio. The first pages carried old dates, crossed out measures, revisions, and failures. Farther inside lay the arrangement that had begun the public dispute. None of the pages looked grand to justify everything that had happened around them. They were only paper and ink, yet they contained the history of a woman, learning that authorship could be denied, borrowed, praised under another name, and still remain hers. Quentin stood a short distance away. "You kept it," he said. Sabina looked down at the first page. "Of course, I meant the name. Written clearly at the top was Sabina Kenward, not Duchess of Ardenshaw, not Sabina Rothbury, not a title given through marriage. The name belonged to the woman who had written the pages when no one applauded." "I thought about changing it," she said. Quentin waited. "And I decided not to." He nodded. No question. No attempt to make the choice about him. Sabina closed the folio slowly. As she did, the silver cross at her throat slipped forward and rested for one brief moment against the blue cover. Silver against blue, her mother's memory against her own work. Sabina looked at it, then lifted the cross back into place. Quentin did not touch the folio. Instead, he offered his hand. Nothing more. He simply held it there and waited. Sabina looked once more at her name inside the cover. Then she placed her hand in his.